You did everything right and you're still falling behind. In the year ending early 2026, wages grew 3.4%. Inflation ran 3.8. Real wages declined again. You earned more, and you still lost ground. You felt it. At the grocery store, renewing your insurance, looking at a restaurant menu you used to not think twice about. You did the math in your head and it never added up, and eventually you started wondering if you were doing something wrong. You're not. But here's what nobody told you. The playbook you were handed only worked under very specific conditions, and those conditions quietly expired. The strange part? The people who followed the playbook most faithfully are often the ones getting hit the hardest. Because when a map stops matching reality, the most disciplined people are usually the last ones to stop trusting it. And almost nobody updated the map. Not banks, not employers, not financial media, not the people telling you to just save more. Because the system still works extremely well for the people positioned correctly inside it. The institutions that profit from your financial behavior had no particular incentive to tell you it had changed. So they didn't. By the end of this video, you'll understand what changed, why hard work stopped feeling like progress, and 3 specific adjustments. The first about the number you're using to measure your financial life. Because if you're tracking your bank balance instead of your purchasing power, you're probably already tens of thousands of dollars behind without realizing it. Here's how it happened. Here's the number that should make you furious. Consumer prices have more than tripled since 1984. The CPI has climbed from a base of 100 to over 333 as of spring 2026. Wages did not triple. That gap between what things cost and what you earn has been widening for decades. Not fast enough to panic people overnight, just slowly enough that most people blamed themselves instead of the system changing underneath them. For a long time, the standard playbook actually worked. Get a stable job, spend less than you earn, save consistently, stay disciplined. From roughly the mid-1980s through 2020, inflation stayed relatively controlled. Wages kept rough pace, and slow, boring discipline genuinely moved people forward. So the advice wasn't wrong. It was arithmetic that happened to be correct under very specific conditions. Conditions nobody mentioned, because nobody expected them to change. 3 things changed them. The Fed suppressed interest rates for decades, which quietly collapsed what savings accounts could return. After 1979, productivity and wages decoupled. Productivity climbed 61%, bottom 90% compensation grew 26%. Then pandemic stimulus added $5 trillion to the system in under 2 years and set off a price surge that, by spring 2026, has pushed costs close to 30% above pre-pandemic levels. The gap between earnings and costs didn't widen by accident. It was the downstream effect of institutional decisions that benefited borrowers and asset holders and quietly taxed everyone else. The price increases stayed. The raises mostly didn't. And here's the part nobody warned you about. You didn't notice right away because the number in your bank account kept going up. The paycheck looked fine, but something still felt off, like you were working just as hard and somehow arriving in the same place every year. That feeling wasn't in your head. That's why people feel exhausted right now. Not because they're lazy, not because they failed, but because they're trying to win a game whose rules changed while they were still playing by the old ones. And the official numbers still don't fully capture how bad that feels. Here's exactly what changed and where the official numbers are still lying to you. Now here's where it gets sneaky. Inflation came down from its 9% peak, briefly touched 3.4 in late 2023, and then climbed back to 3.8% as of spring 2026. Sounds manageable, almost reassuring. But that number is an average, and averages lie. Specifically, they lie to you. April 2026, airline tickets up over 20%, food up 3.2%, healthcare up 2.5%. A handful of commodity categories down, the things weighted most heavily toward higher income spending. So when economists say inflation is cooling, what many people actually hear is, then why does everything still feel expensive? Because your life isn't a weighted average. Here's what most people don't realize. The CPI is a political and economic instrument. It's weighted by aggregate consumption patterns, not median household patterns. The categories that fell are disproportionately consumed by higher income households. The CPI isn't wrong, it's measuring the wrong household. If you spend most of your income on food, housing, and getting to work, which describes most Americans, your personal inflation rate is meaningfully higher than the reported headline. For a median household earning $65,000, that gap represents $2,000 to $3,000 in purchasing power, quietly gone each year. The number goes up. The pressure doesn't come down. You've probably had this moment. You see a headline that says inflation is cooling, and then you go to the grocery store and nothing feels different. Or you look at your cart and put something back, not because you can't technically afford it, but because it just doesn't feel right anymore. That's not you being bad at math, that's you correctly sensing that the number they're reporting isn't measuring your life. That gap between the official number and your lived experience, it's not a reporting error, it's a design feature of a metric optimized for aggregate economic management, not for telling you whether you're actually keeping up. Here's the thing, nobody explains clearly enough. When inflation cools, prices don't go back down. They just stop rising as fast. By spring 2026, prices are close to 30% higher than before the pandemic. 30%. The rate fluctuated. The price level never came back. Inflation dropping from 9% to 3% doesn't mean things got cheaper. It means they got expensive, slightly slower. That's it. Every price increase of the last several years is locked in permanently, and the next increment is coming right behind it. The Fed's target is 2% annual inflation, not 0. 2. That's a policy choice, not a natural law, and it's a choice that systematically benefits specific parties. Governments carrying $34 trillion in debt get to repay it in cheaper future dollars. Asset owners watch nominal prices rise while their real debt cost falls. Banks lend at rates above inflation and collect the spread. The 2% target isn't neutral. It's a design feature that transfers wealth from people holding cash to people holding assets, every single year by design. Not dramatically, quietly. Which means the most responsible thing you can do, the thing you were explicitly told to do, is being quietly taxed every year by design. You did the budgeting, you avoided the big stupid purchases, you were disciplined, and you still felt like you were running in place. That's not a personal failure. That's a structural feature working exactly as intended, on you. So when someone tells you to just save more, they're telling you to stockpile something the system is engineered to shrink. Saving matters. Discipline matters. But if your money grows slower than inflation for long enough, the math eventually turns against you no matter how responsible you are. $50,000 sitting in a standard savings account, the kind most Americans actually use, earning the national average of around 0.6%, with inflation running near 4%, loses roughly $20,000 in real purchasing power over 10 years. Not because you did anything wrong, because that's the math. But here's the reversal most people miss. This isn't actually a new problem. In the early 1980s, wages were rising over 9% in some years. Sounds incredible, right? Except inflation was running so hot that real wages still fell. People were getting huge raises and getting poorer at the same time. Sound familiar? The difference is what they could do about it. Back then, interest rates hit 15%. You could fight inflation defensively just by holding cash correctly. A savings account was a real financial instrument, not a holding pen for cash that was slowly losing value. Today, that defense is gone. Savings accounts spent a decade paying essentially nothing. Not because of market forces, but because of sustained institutional intervention that suppressed rates to benefit borrowers. The tool was taken off the table. And here's the strange twist underneath all of this. The same forces that quietly hurt savers massively rewarded asset owners. The same institutional tilt that eroded the return on cash inflated the value of everything that could produce a return: equity, property, ownership stakes. The old defenses don't work. The new ones do. The only question is whether you know what they are. And here's what stings about this. A lot of people who followed the old playbook perfectly, who saved consistently, who didn't overspend, who did exactly what they were supposed to do, are the ones sitting here feeling the most confused. Because they did their part. The system just quietly changed the terms. Here's what you can actually do. So, what do you actually do with this? 3 adjustments. First, stop measuring progress in dollars. Measure it in purchasing power. If your income went up 5%, but your real costs went up 7, you didn't get ahead. You fell behind with a nicer paycheck. For a median household, that 2-point gap is roughly $1,500 to $2,000 a year in lost purchasing power. The number in your account went up, your position went down. Track what your money buys, not just how much you have. Second, your raises need to beat inflation, not merely match it. A raise that barely keeps pace with rising costs is survival, not progress. To count as real income growth with inflation running near 4%, your raise needs to clear at least 4.5% to 5% consistently. Anything below that, your real compensation is declining every year you stay. That's not pessimism, that's arithmetic. If your employer isn't beating that threshold, you're not just stagnating, you're subsidizing them with the gap. Third, savings alone is a losing strategy. Most people who followed the standard save more advice didn't know what they were actually doing. They thought discipline was the variable. They optimized the wrong thing. Here's the test. If your money isn't consistently returning more than the inflation rate, currently close to 4%, you're losing ground in slow motion. That's the threshold, not the asset class. $50,000 compounding at 1% to 2% versus 7% real return, over 20 years that difference is roughly $300,000 to $400,000 in real purchasing power. Not because one person worked harder, because one person understood which game they were actually playing. Saving is step 1. If it's your only step, you're running on a treadmill that speeds up every year, and you'll never know it because the number keeps going up. Here's the bottom line. You're not crazy, you're not irresponsible, and you're not imagining the pressure. A lot of people followed the rules exactly the way they were taught, and still ended up feeling like progress got harder every year. Not because they failed, because the rules were changed by policy decisions, by institutional incentives, by a financial system optimized for people who already hold assets. Now you know. Most people will watch this, think, that's interesting, and go back to the same habits. That's fine. That's most people. If you're updating your map, subscribe. Every week I put out videos about the hidden mechanics shaping modern financial life, not the polished version designed to make people feel comfortable, but the version that helps you actually understand the game you're living inside.